We're good.
Thank you for coming. I'm George Kalogeris, and I'd like to say a few words about Dan. Dan Tobin's published work began in 1999 with two books. Can you hear me okay back there?
Yeah.
With two books, one of poetry and one of criticism. The poetry book was titled Where the World is Made, and the critical volume, Passage to the Center, Imagination and the Sacred Poetry of Seamus Heaney. The Passage to the Center, Seamus Heaney, the Sacred and the Imagination. This is the shining source of the plenitude, the place from which the world of Dan Tobin's poetry was made. And it puts me in mind of something I once heard Seamus say, it might have been in this very room, about his own poetry beginnings. He said that he felt it coming together only when his reading life and his real life intersected. For Dan Tobin, his reading life includes not only literature, but serious pondering of heavy-duty philosophical and scientific texts. But his real life, as is true for all of us, is subject to fateful mortality. He's that rare thing, a poet of both deep pondering and of raw experience, as at home with the metaphysical maximes of Simone Weil, as he is with the Rambler station wagon, his family owned when he was a child. And book after book, his reading life and his real life have intersected in searching and startlingly inventive ways. But intersection for him as a Christian poet also means the Logos, the Word made flesh. And he's a devotional poet as well, and one who's just as faithfully devoted to the exigencies of craft, whether it's free verse or formal verse. And I hope we can talk about that a little bit afterwards. I was trying to think of a metaphor that might convey what I so admire about Dan's work. And I remembered his poem about a jetty and how he compares its zigzag stonework to a sentence. It starts like this: the jetty stretches a stone sentence across the bay. Its jigsaw syntax entered like hopscotch from Land's End. Growing up in Winthrop, I remember those jetties and how the jumbled rocks were cemented together and how they went out into the depths and broke off into the surging tide. They look like the arching backs of dolphins. Dan's poems go out into the depths. The jetty reaches a stone sentence across the bay. Its jigsaw syntax entered like hopscotch from Land's End. His poems are both an intellectual jigsaw puzzle and a lyric hopscotch dance. They have a great metaphorical reach. And like the jetty, they can't help looking back across the dark Atlantic, back to the Land's End that was the impoverished Ireland of his ancestors. And finally, all who know Dan have heard his wonderfully uninhibited laugh. In his great poem, Late Bloomer, he knows what the best poets know. The joke is on him. We're all Narcissus. Here's how the poem ends, with its solipsistic guffaw on himself. Narcissus, the name, a wind passing through a wind. Now watch me step through the door of myself. Dan Tobin.
Thank you so much, George, for those very kind words. And it's just wonderful to be here, talk about imagination and the sacred. This is a sacred space for those of you who know the Grolier. And thank you, James Fraser, who is the, I suppose, custodian of the Grolier now. one of my former students, I confess, and a wonderful one from Emerson College, and a couple of other Emerson students who are here today. Also to the Menkaty family who maintain this extraordinary place. And thanks all of you for coming. And for those on Zoom, I know I want to just call out one person I know is on Zoom, and that my first poetry teacher ever, Michael Palma, who's a wonderful poet himself and a tremendous translator, I know is on Zoom tonight. So Michael, thank you. I wouldn't be here without you. We have to let our teachers know that we care about them still. I'm going to begin with a very, very short poem. It's a cento. That means it's made up of lines of other people's poems. And I'm not going to tell you who wrote these lines. It will be a quiz afterwards. It's called Gravesend. It is like what we imagine knowledge to be, a firmament reflected in a sea. This first full-length poem, I suppose, that I'm going to read is called The Clock, and it was the first poem in my first book of poems, Where the World is Made. The Clock. Bored with plastic armies, he climbs onto the parlor love seat and watches the wide expression of the clock. He doesn't know what time it is, doesn't know how in no time those numbers will fill his days the way water fills a bath into which an exhausted man lowers himself, not wanting to rise. Sun and moon gaze back at him from the glaze of the silver frame, each with a human face, his own face mirrored there. Look closer, his mother says, and you can see the small hand move. And he leans closer now, steadied in her arms, the hand a winded runner lapped on the track. That's hours, she says, the big hand's minutes, the quick seconds. And the boy fingers the pivot anchoring them. His touch stirs with the machine. I'm older now, and now, and now. The gears start to tick through every room of that house. This is more or less a sort of selected tour through the whole gamut, right? I'm going to read a poem now from the second book, my second book. And it has my favorite title of any poem I've written. It's called Deep Shit. I can't remember the name of the gaunt monk who stroked my face during confession years ago in that bare abbey room. Tell me what's wrong, son, tell me what's wrong. His fingers soft as a grandmother, his eyes deep and pleading. Nor can I remember what I told him, something about the pain of feeling alone, something grim and adolescent, my back arched against the wall. Deep shit, I said to myself, you're in deep shit. Though his hand didn't travel any further, and I confessed my sins, forgave the indiscretion. Afterwards, I walked out along a road puddled by afternoon rain as I whispered the prayer of the lost. Something facile and earnest, something parroted and true. Show me the way. Before I knew who could make this up, I was ankle deep in cow dung, deep shit, my life already steeped in allegory. Christian, hunkered in the slough of despond, every man forsaken by all but good deeds. Though now it's midnight cowboy I think of, how Joe Buck discovers he'll do anything to keep alive. Turn tricks in dank theaters, bash an old man's face with a phone to save Ratso, his friend, who dies anyway. I'm lonely, lonely, the crazed queen howls, root of all evil, before he presses our hero to kneel, and Joe, pure of heart, breaks free into the sleazy New York night, his journey to the promised land of Florida begun, and the waste he's made of his life, his deep shit. Deep shit, or whatever it is, even mishandled, that draws us somehow beyond ourselves. What moved the old priest to stroke my face, his need to touch, to be touched, more powerful than any vow. Yes, it's lonely, lonely, like the nameless crosses of the abbey graves where the monks perform their final wordless prayer. Oh, deep shit to be sure. Something broken and unbearable. Something ineluctable and long. We have some former Irish travelers here, and I figured I would read this one. This is one of the poems from The Narrows. Actually, it wasn't originally published in The Narrows. I incorporated it into The Narrows because it should have been in the original version, but I didn't write it in time. And so I'm reordering my entire literary life before your eyes. This is called The Green Road in Clare, The Burren Way. Homesick for more than home, here astride the sea's genius, I long to dissolve in a limestone landscape. These terraced beds imprinted with grikes, the pillowed clints interleaved with hollows, where for eons rainwater's patient nibs scribed the chronicles of absence into karst, and still do. Lines plumbing sidewise underground, forming a web of secret caves like halls in a dream house I dreamed of in my parents' house long ago. I cannot go there, but follow the track's soft laneway out past stile and waymarking deep into Boreen, the place of rocks. Oceans crushed shells and skeletons formed to a horizon risen from the ancient sea. Neither tree to hang someone, nor soil enough to bury him, Cromwell lamented, having reached this graven edge. Though had he looked, he'd have seen graves enough, tombs, raths recalling playthings in a land of make-believe. Now this lost famine village still deserted and brooding, where a surface river tumbles from the shale, its roofless walls a thriving quarter of dens and fuchsia. My green road itself is like a path through loss, where famine roads splinter, directionless to nowhere. For the hungry, their work a relief without relief, while underneath me it flows on. Water's flawless love, honing the inner spaces, invisibly, constantly. So along the outer faults the barren world flourishes, cinquefoil, silverweed, cranesbill, gentian, orchid, saxifrage splitting the rock's dappled stencils of bone. Rock roses burst beside the ephemeral lakes. It's not all death, I think, this double cemetery of earth and thought, with its sunken city off the coast, with its green hole by the harbor the locals call hell, and its cliffs rising from the head of the past at the spirit's base. Who is my father in this world? Or my mother? More, that silent T, my central empty cross. What was it I meant to find, here, now, nowhere, raging in the pitch-pipe wind? An answer, human, out of the sublime, to be whole again, song mastering the wake of everything gone? You are this longing, the iron in the wish for origin. It sounds you, shapes you, water under stone. I'm going to read a father poem, short one this time. A couple of long ones, sort of long ones there, so this is a short one. It's called Near Hag's Head, Cliffs of Moher, Ireland. This headland is the battered prow of a ship my silent father rides into the Atlantic. Gust after gust buffets the raw crag of his face, his windbreaker flapping like a sail. He could be his own father's grandfather, the way he stands before the rail as others stood before the hold, the blind journey before them, and nods to me in recognition, despite the ocean between us. Even he knows on these cliffs the dead are reading aloud from the Book of the Wind. Do we have any Stooge fans out there? Three Stooges? All right, it's somebody else besides me.
I will admit.
Okay, this is called Chin Music, and it's also baseball season, so this is a baseball poem. And it's another father poem too. And it also references a photograph that is a real photograph, and it's described in the poem, so I won't describe it now. but you'll see. My parents and I and my brother used to go to a hunting lodge in Jersey when we were kids, way up, right on the border with Pennsylvania. So this is from that time. Chin music. Whenever I look at this photograph that hangs beside the bookshelf in my study, I sharpen my eyes like a batter who trains on the curveball bending toward the plate, trying to judge its spin. And like a curve, it seems to defy physics, how these two once occupied the same time and space, and still do inside this frame. The babe, as you'd expect, commanding the center. The rest of the hunting party spreading out, the lesser of the tribe around its chief. And there, beside him, his hair slicked back no longer, a wild clownish ring, looking the young rabbi, Larry, the lowliest stooge, third fiddle after Moe and Curly, the straight man whose antic pleas always seemed more desperate for having glimpsed the desperate truth. Forget Patroclus. Think instead of Achilles in love with Caliban, or Gilgamesh roving out for battle beside Polonius. Think of the Stooges beside a beefcake Heracles in a wacky 50s riff on Homeric myth. Or rather, think of Everett Brundage, who owned the lodge where this photo was taken. It had to be sometime in the 30s, before the Babe's moonshot drives arced into legend, before Larry starred with Curly and Moe in their madcap parody of Hitler's Germany. I have a t-shirt that reads, "I've seen the future, and it's fine," where Larry's face shrieks in neon, as if he'd shaken hands with 1,000 volts, his whole head flashing like an absurd Medusa. The one I remember Everett, I think of a man who for years kept this lodge alive, a taxidermist paradise of deer heads, antlers, bobcats, and one full-size black bear on the fringe of big resorts. I remember he had the keenest eyes, that the whole raucous crowd of locals and exiles from the city gathered at his bar, one manifold tribe roaring on into the night. But I remember, too, those nights he drank until my father closed the bar and drove him home, how he lived alone, though he had a wife who left him, how his help, they were friends, stole quietly from the till, and he lost the lodge, the one thing he loved. And whenever I remember how they found him sprawled, dead in the dive he'd opened on the highway, it makes me think of the phrase chin music, meaning a high, hard one, a tough pitcher's brushback of the batter who leans too far over the plate. Chin music was what he said that afternoon my father drove us down to the lodge just before it closed. On TV, the pitcher reared into his windup and swooping down fired a fastball that started letter high and rose in a perfect jet stream directly at the batter's head, driving him to the dirt. "That's chin music," Everett said, leaning his big body over the bar, his broad nose and wry grin, not unlike the Babe's. "It's how life plays you before you go down for good." Do I have to say he gave me the photo for a gift that I'm as awestruck by its sheer improbability, having watched those stilted newsreels of the great, the baffled mania of the stooge, who took hammer blows to his head, who had his eyes poked out, it seemed, 1,000 times. The Stooges, with their own chin music, that made me think there was no pain. In the photograph, the turkey splays its feathers before the hunters, one a hero, one a thoughtful man who played the fool. Did Everett take this picture, thrilled to have fame and greatness come to this unlikely place? The crowd fans out, mostly smiling, around the kill. Who are all these nameless men? Water break. George graciously mentioned my poem, Late Bloomer, which I'm going to read in full now. And some of you will recognize the form. This is a Huzzle. Late Bloomer. Something whispered I wanted more of myself. That's how I turned into the fleur of myself. The lake, the ripples shimmer, that lilting face. I'll guzzle the infinite pour of myself. What is this flow I feel, its course through soft bone, the current, the mother lode, the ore of myself? Fill me with all things, empty me completely, I winnow, and still am the store of myself. Imagine earth, the stars, all space expanding, and finding everywhere the core of myself. If soul's estate means a mansion's many rooms, then someday I will take a tour of myself. Do you think me insane, my hypocrite twin, a catatonic stare, the whore of myself? Call me this, call me that, call me what you will. I surpass beyond words the lore of myself. Time blooms with space, and there sums all I am. I am forever the before of myself. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty, beauty is truth. X to nth power is the shore of myself. Narcissus, the name a wind passing through wind. Now watch me step through the door of myself. I'm going to read a poem that is also in a form, and it's a local poem. It's called Vespers Meditation at Wellfleet Bay. Anybody go down to the Cape here? Okay, there's a Cape poem. Vespers Meditation at Wellfleet Bay. Moored on the glittering fabric of the waves, the boats endure each omnipresent fold that caves on itself to become the waves I'm watching now. Improvisational waves, meticulous ripples, endlessly unwound, it seems, from the spool of themselves. These waves, awash in their opulent world of waves, luff the hulls and bound sails, stayed by knots against the wind, though it's mild, and not one of the gales that sometimes hurls the waves onto the wharf that I will call my home for now, as though I had no other home. The wind and light that make the seascape home magnetize distance. They also move in waves, they also travel from some farther home, if one can call the roiling infinite home, not outerward but deeper in the folds, the inner amplitudes of bodies. Home apportioned into Timbuktus of home. Gazing at the bay, one could feel enwound with such similitudes, but for the wound and emptiness in the idea of home. It's the thinking of it makes the knot inside the mind, the gut, the mind, the knot, unraveling. You are what this is not, though this is all you'll know to be your home. If swimming through space I saw the blue knot of the planet floating in what it's not, I might feel like I'd been furled in waves, myself unfurling from the fixed knot of what I know myself to be, this knot of particular matter. In the folds of myself, emergent aqueous folds, I tack toward the offing of what I'm not, where everything that is unwinds to be wound into new signatures that too will be unwound. Knowing this seals the gravity of the wound one feels, a black hole's all imploding knot would be the outward figure of this wound if somehow the scales could be wound and wound into a gold intricacy of home that, by naming it, could cicatrize the wound. Scale down. Follow to where the strings are wound. No, wind what is, was, what will be in waves, the melisma in which the worlds are wound. Let light's leitmotif enwind you in its folds. There is only this extravagance as it unfolds. Along the shore, the sand grains wash in folds, micron by micron they rose, will be wound down by forces that keep all in their fold. I feel like Thel on the brink beyond her fold. How is it all things are what they are not, and clod and spirit run back to the fold of Blake's imagined world? The beach unfolds in broken symmetries, an expanse of home, shattered shells, shattered stones. Away from home, families tore the wharf, invisible foes from wood end ruffle the air in waves. A young girl kneels along the lulling waves. Why do we come at dusk to worship waves when night makes plain its penchant to unfold? I know the name. I'd know the name in which all things are wound. I wish I knew this vastness I am not, its everlasting flow. Light is always home. I'm going to get a little bit more philosophical for a second. Page. This is called, this is called A Cottage at Ross Row. And this is a longer poem. This is just the middle panel of a triptych on the life of Ludwig Wittgenstein, the great philosopher who's had such a huge influence on everything afterwards. And maybe some of you know that he was actually lived in Ireland for a while. So in a little house, a cottage in Mayo, Ross Row. So this particular middle panel is focusing on Wittgenstein's life in that little cottage, looking backward at his life prior to that. And he was born the same day as Hitler, interestingly enough. A Cottage at Ross Row. In the Gospels, one finds huts in St. Paul churches. And here, where Killary opens to the sea, a disused Coast Guard cottage where the IRA hid their prisoners. So you sit shock-haired, granite-eyed at the kitchen window, chipping at propositions, the frames and games of language like a blown gestalt. The difficulty is to realize the groundlessness of our believing. While, like every morning, the caretaker arrives timely with milk and peat and strews across the floor tea leaves to draw the dirt, then scatters the shattered drafts to burn, as if to prove the lonely genius's trope for how you lived your life. Philosophy is nothing but tidying up a room. Though weren't you there too, the private at the searchlight on the Vistula, waiting for your turn at the front, the kite maker who as a child schooled with Hitler. And at the observation post, nightly flak and gunfire, nightly expecting to die. From time to time, I become an animal. Your Tractatus carried in trenches, prison camps to the unregarding world. Giving up your family wealth, you taught the poor. Taught, when fame came to you, your dons in waiting, to turn away from academic life and work like a gardener whose spade uproots the wish to die. For truth cannot be said, it can only be shown. Which is why you now stand completely absorbed by the shape you've traced in earth beside the path where you walk in the hills above the harbor, a shape of two aspects in one, like flesh and spirit. Before you move ahead, thinking of the boat ride you took the day before, the seabirds, the islands, how the clouds lifted a moment from one distant bend, and sunlight rioted in silence along the rock face. I'm going to read a couple of poems from the previous book of poems. Before I publish the mansions, I'm not going to read from the mansions. I include none of the mansions in this book because it's one thing, not separate poems. So this poem is called Corpse Flower, Luna Moth. A bit more lyric. They actually had a corpse flower, I believe, in the Franklin Park Zoo a few years ago. And I think that's where I got the idea for the poem. Corpse Flower, Luna Moth. The deep whine of it risen tall above the buried corn, its ornamental spade furrowed thoughtfully to human warmth. O unbranched inflorescence, amorpho-phallus, misshapen swelling, with its allure of rotting flesh for the scarabs to follow, hollow, to the sunlit trove, as though all dark were light unbidden by our parsing eye, and love itself hidden inside the word. Call it life enwrapped with death's blight, blooming briefly. Emergent morning, in the sweet gum triggering, green, its wings fanning translucent below the porch light, angelic, a palm of light opening. Hallowed, hatched, each instar inches under cover, a spent thing climbing larval, alluvial, out of every cycle's shelf life, its rife unknowing. To become this end, brief birth flying, flown, thrown at midnight into beginning. Mouthless, it appears something bidden out of the dark, out of the broad leaf, unmoving, to say something wordlessly. The word we two can neither speak nor sing. Any fans of Frankenstein in here? This poem is called Of Gods and Men and Monsters. And I guess it's an ekphrastic poem on two movies. One of Gods and Men, which is described in the poem, so I won't go into it, and the other on James Whale, the great director who made the movie Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein and The Invisible Man, and kind of melds the two together, I suppose. Of Gods and Men and Monsters. At the end of a Gods and Men, the monks march side by side up a snowy mountain, guarded by terrorists who will murder them off-screen in the blinding grace of fog, like a gas cloud, the stricken clutching cloth as they do in Gods and Monsters, the flashback where James Whale, creator of Frankenstein, the Bride of Frankenstein, Invisible Man, relives the horrors endured in trench and redoubt. The French Trappists who lived in Tiberine, their monastery nearby Islamic villagers who came to their door for aid, give their lives to God, willing as they do to die for love. For Christ would never abandon his flock, and they are each Christ, like the villagers who happen to believe a different story. So terror incurs the way the monster waits with the wrong brain, the criminal, and not the original the master wished. Such is the fallen world, as the monks knew, as their master knew, and for love of which he died, and for love of which this world, stroke-ridden, mind flickering to its credits, Whale, the queen of Hollywood, begins his last flirtation with a hunky gardener. Put this gas mask on, the director orders, as the young man poses nude, the mask making him a minotaur, brute animal, soul, hiding at the center of the spiritual quest. Yes, the dying man spurned, not unlike his anguished creature, mute, taught to speak by a blind hermit who too wants a friend, bread good, wine good, the Eucharistic meal before the mob breaks in, before the bride, her own body fashioned from scraps, screams in terror with one look at her mate, before Whale begs his friend to kill him, before he kills himself, which he does, his body floating mildly in the pool's stippled sunlight, like light rippling the flayed air of Tiberine. One day he'll arrive at the door, the man with the stylish fedora and bandaged face, his whole body covered from head to toe under the fashionable overcoat and suit. Wearing the goggles he'll remove to reveal the missing eyes, the missing skull, before he starts to unwind them, the bandages, as if he was nothing but an unhealable wound. And he is nothing, the nothing there. Then a voice growing wilder with need, then the gone in a rustle of bushes beyond the patio with the wind. As the creature stares from its lacework of scars, the creature muttering, friend, friend, over again. The word a puzzle, a questioning, while the hands, trembling, searching, the hastily sewn on hands, open for the offering, pleading again for love. I didn't know I needed this much water for reading this long. I'll read 3 more poems, and they'll all be new poems. The first is called The Combatants, and it's sadly all too timely. It has a little epigraph from the philosopher René Girard. You know René Girard? Choose your enemies carefully, because you will become like them. What lame god will fashion them on his shield, as during those great grim mythic seasons, the bodies stacked high as a harvest yield? Sky drones, clashing switches, missiles wield their fleet nemesis on fleshly Elysians. What lame god will fashion them on his shield that captures sheer rigor, the raving field, the gorged mortis of the hater's reasons? The bodies stacked high as a harvest yield, extenuate in pretense, blood annealed, flung with the surfeit of love's brave treasons. What lame god will fashion them on his shield so pixel perfect for the spectacle's appeal it clinches history's tangle of intrusions? These bodies stacked high as a harvest yield look skyward, gazing dimly through a veil that falls like ash before the ardent legions. What lame god will fashion them on his shield? The bodies stacked high as a harvest yield. So I'll finish off with 2 poems, one a little bit long, one really short. This is called Swallowtail, and this is Boston, Cambridge area, and some of you may remember a child who was murdered several years ago by the name of Bella Bond. Her body washed up on an island in a harbor. Well, so this poem treats that. It sort of braids together eventually Bella, the butterfly, and strangely enough, St. Augustine. Swallowtail. Slowly, as soundlessly in its unknowing, what the driven thing must hunger for is love's white noise, a latent faring writhe along the leafage's flagrant green. Green too, this wending, callow, creaturely, unheedful in its patient haste of eyes, watchful beside the deck's complacent cage of spindles. So we lift the cat tenderly indoors, our sweet beloved predator, hardwired for the hunt, and leaning closer. Tiger, zebra-like, the transverse lashings, each a spray of onyx gold licked at the edge, its 10 segments a kind of plump machine, the crest it seems mulling its tiny lee. Beauty, Augustine knew, was a manifold diversity, sky and earth and sea, no less this gradual ascendant likewise fueled by desire. Even the smallest bulk that moves, though the earthly body pulls toward earth, its blindly pulsing climb the flesh's goad. Just so, at the would-be saint's retreat, the whole company gathered to attend how the chopped portions of a centipede inched across a tablet of their own accord. Is the beast's soul so divisible? One worm disproving the venerable Plato's doctrine, its immaterial nature hacked to living bits? Thagas lay behind him, and Rome, Milan, his intended life, nameless loves, his lust, all dust going to dust under a fig tree. His pent longing in the garden, a tumult of the will. The mind commands the hand to move, yet mind is mind and hand is body. Ahead there is Ostia, his mother's death, that quickened time in a further garden where, he confessed, our minds were lifted to inexhaustible abundance. So the flesh, the radiant light of this physical world, ceases to matter compared with eternity. Then years unhomely in his African home, penned in by duties, penning his peregrine civitas Dei, lawsuits, letters, a slow gutting of heresies, his world hung where moth and rust consume. Larval, what may yet emerge imago, slides a little as we lift it, leaf and all, from its camouflage along the potted herbs, to rest it somewhere deeper in our garden, somewhere where, in peace, it can spin itself into a patient sack, its silken matrix of transfiguration. Once I saw one hooked like a frosted ornament on its branch, the chrysalis growing slowly transparent before the new body loosens to take wing. When this spring they found the little girl, faceless, decomposed, she had washed ashore, dumped in a duffel in the harbor. So they scanned her, sculptor, resurrect her, enhanced the image with digital grace until we saw her as she must have been, looking at us, past us, through pixelated light. It was her time to die, the killer offered months later, her mother's lover, her mother also harrowing her few years living. Possessed by demons, they said. The pair's high school photos discordant on the news. All things draw towards some image of true joy, Augustine believed, and believed likewise the dead have bodies composed of spirit, the given flesh restored and glorified, where not a single hair of the head will perish. The damned too have bodies, living, he held, the way a salamander sustains in fire, burning forever without loss of substance, though evil is just deficiency, a turning towards separateness, our region of unlikeness in which mortal life passes away like smoke, and the moment life begins, it starts to die. The nothing in things that pretends to be, pretends in division and butchery until grief torments like a worm in timber, and each thing tending toward eternal life or eternal death. And our swallowtail? Down in the canopy among the hostas and sweet fennel, along a fence's rusted diamond, it has wound its world around itself, has been drawn to that going inside as by a lodestone's lure beyond the given, miracle of miracles, the world itself. Though there is no safe place, the saint recalled, but in the uncreated. And still the bodies go, particle by particle, to their peace, as into an olive press. And above, the firmament still stretches like a skin, while below we remain a problem to ourselves, while time distends endlessly, it seems, cruelly, to what end? The saint, imago, and murdered girl must know, as if her name, Bella, beauty, were the all in all that calls to everything, soundlessly, as slowly, in our unknowing. I'm going to finish off with a very short poem called The Sand Painting. Each intricate lovely thing will be erased. Worldly hands banish what the world's regard. Worldly hands vanish from the world's regard, believing they had scored the world in stone. The self-adoring atoms whirl in stone. This brightly colored dome reclines in sand and casts the four directions into sand and centers the very wind with patient dust, conjured intimations of the ancient dust. Someone labored faithfully grain by grain, knowing all would scatter grain by grain or wear away as air destroys the rock. What is that joyous singing inside the rock? Though each intricate lovely thing will be erased. Thanks.
If anyone has questions for Dan, you can stick around and we can have a little discussion. Any questions?
I hope this question isn't misjudged because it's an influence question.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. When I hear your poems, I feel as though they are searching for a kind of self in two different ways. And one of them is the sort of historical sense that often makes me think of some of Robert Lowell's notebooks, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Those poems talk about a region of unlikeness, I think land of unlikeness.
Mm-hmm.
The other being the search for a kind of transcendent self, and maybe even the escape from personality that T.S. Eliot talks about. And I think, though I could be wrong, there's a pretty deep relationship with Eliot and what he's doing. And so I wonder how you can, if you can describe how you know when a poem is balanced between the two searches, or if you search for that consciously or unconsciously.
It's definitely not conscious in the sense that, I'm not, I've read quite a bit of Lowell, and I've read quite a bit of Eliot. So there are certainly influences on the work, there's no doubt about it. And I think that focus on history is very much a deep concern of mine, no doubt. That desire for transcendence, that's frankly never not been with me. So I don't try to sort of balance it, I try to follow it. I try to follow whatever the poem is asking me to pursue. I don't have a plan necessarily involved. George mentioned Seamus Heaney at the beginning. He has a phrase called "have your spurs at the ready," and I kind of like that idea. I try to have, as often as I possibly can, my spurs at the ready, or to do things like occasionally translate poems that will keep the juices moving as best they can when I don't feel like I got much going. But in terms of conscious, Eliot, I believe, said, poet needs to know when to be conscious and when to be unconscious. And so I think, if anything I'm trying to balance is exactly that, because I might come with an intention and my own inclination is architectural. I think poets favor a particular kind of temperament. Mine is certainly structural. So the thing that I have to sort of be especially wary of is being satisfied that the poem's structure has arrived, and I see that my job is done. Right? So I have to work against that, have to be able to allow the risky, untenable portions into the poem so that I'm not overly controlling it. And at the same time, you do have to control it because you can't just splurge out, It doesn't necessarily make for, there are poems out there that do that, but it ain't me. So I have to balance those two things. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's a good question.
It does for the most part, yeah. I mean,
For the most part, okay. You can press me, I don't care.
So what do you do to keep your spurs at the ready?
I keep a notebook with me at all times when I travel. I do write initial notes in a notebook. The phone is okay, but it's a little foreign to me still. If you see me try to type anything into my phone, you'll realize that he's pretty lame. So one thing is to make notes and keep notes and write ideas down. The other would be translation, doing some translation. I've translated Paul Celan. I've translated Rilke. There'll be a book of my translations from late Rilke coming out in a year or two. I don't know. James's wonderful new press is taking that book, Staircase Books, and then some others along the way. So that's keep the juices moving, even though it gets harder as you get older. It's hard at the beginning, and then you feel like you kind of like, it's like a runner, like you feel like at one point I have a little bit of stride going, right? Unless you're a sprinter, and then it all ends. But I prefer Yeats. Yeats was a long distance runner, right? He right to the end, writing just tremendous poems. So that's sort of what I would like for myself. Other?
Listening to you, I find myself thinking a lot about the distinction, if there is any, and where it may fall in your process, and to what degree, between poetry that is born out of the intellectual, analytical, or academic, say, sitting at a desk, as opposed to poetry that comes alive either through lived experience or emotions being welled up at any given time, and what your relationship of awareness is to that, if any, and where it might fall in the editing process or writing even.
Yeah, I think many of the newer poems are, looking at some of the poems I didn't read are like looking out at the backyard, and some backyard bits in the Swallowtail poem, obviously. But I think in a way that points to something I value deeply is the interweaving of apparent contraries. The idea that one can actually have an intellectual life that might even be rarefied to a certain extent. I mean, Wittgenstein's, you don't see somebody reading that on the Red Line very often, right? But nonetheless, I found him compelling, but then to be able to get into, scraps of paper and tea leaves scattered on the floor, to be not just a matter of some sort of theoretical pursuit, but something that drives down into the fundaments of being a human being. So I'll get back to your question about Eliot said of John Donne, who is one of my favorite poets, that he thinking and smelling the odor of a rose, that's a paraphrase, were not contrary things for John Donne. They were pretty much all part of the package, and that we have since John Donne fallen into a dissociation of sensibility. I don't know how true that is or not, but if anything, I think the work as a whole is trying to overcome whatever dissociation of sensibility I might have been born into and might have inherited. And so I think that's what the poems are ultimately about in many, many, many different facets.
I like philosophy is paraphrasing, straightening up a messy room.
Yeah. Well, I wish I could have written that one myself, but that was Wittgenstein straight out. Hey, Ted.
Thank you. I will be interested in your definition of sensibility, so we can navigate that, but there's a second question, actually it's a comment. The impersonality of Eliot is talked about ad infinitum, and his influence on your work has a smell for me.
Hopefully it's not a stink.
Well, no, it has kind of a waft.
Yeah.
But the way that I experienced what you read tonight was the amount of evocative tenderness in your work. And that's something that I have a hard time finding in Eliot.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, well, I the impersonality element in Eliot, I think Eliot is really in all of those poems, maybe just not as obviously as somebody like a Lowell, where particularly late poems. But I would say, yeah, I want to cross across those boundaries of highly. I could have read poems about my mother and father from the Narrows. Some are very hard. They were hard poems to write. I kind of alluded to one or two of those in the ones I read, but I didn't want to overwhelm in that regard. So yeah, we all experience traumatic events of one kind or another, sometimes extremely traumatic and sometimes nonetheless traumatic. And our lives have to sort of overcome those, but you don't just overcome it by neglecting it and shoving it down. You can only overcome it by going through. And so, one way or another, even the poem about Wittgenstein is a way of trying to move through my own deep questions about living the way we live, or living at all, for that matter. Having a consciousness, for example. Sensibility, that was the first question. I teach a course at Emerson called Ideas of Order, Singing and Sensibility. And so I have to answer that.
Thank you.
Even in the course description. The courses, and the idea of sensibility for me is, what is your vision of reality? And what is your vision of reality? It might be religious, it might not be. It could be anything, right? And then, secondly, as an artist, whether you're an artist with words or otherwise, how does your art wrestle with your vision of reality? How does it alter it? How does it develop it? How does it surprise your vision of reality? Does it stay the same? Does it evolve? Is it at odds with itself? That would be me, the last part, to some extent. Maybe trying to be less at odds with myself, but I think you have to be at odds to some extent, because we don't live in a pure transcendent world. We live in a very complicated, difficult world. And we know that now. In case we didn't know it before, we certainly know it now, right? Over the last year and a half, it lasts 3 minutes, right? It's really a difficult world to deal with, but we have to deal with it in the best way that we can, and in a way that's not a running away. But, yeah, other folks.
When you study a poet that you like or you want to understand more deeply, are you interested a lot in the details of that poet's life? Do you want to know about them?
Yeah.
And then does it change how you look at their poetry when you know more?
I definitely want to know more about certain poets' lives. So I read a life of John Donne, more than one life of John Donne. Very interesting life. Certainly influences how I read the poems. The poems have to be, they come out of the life, but they have to exist apart from the life. The life is, at least is in this level of existence, is going to go away. Like it's always going to go away. So the art has to become a sort of remnant of the life, but also an effort at transcendence from the life. A sort of a desired imprint of what's possible out of every life as a kind of gift. Sometimes the gift to the world can be pretty obvious and sometimes not so obvious. And I'm not making a judgment about what's better at all, just because somebody may have written some tremendously great poems and influential poems, doesn't mean that their life was necessarily all that good. When we learn about the lives of artists and writers, it's always kind of scary. Hopefully I haven't committed something terrible too much in my life, but I think learning about the lives of poets is important. Other one would be George Manley Hopkins, whose work I absolutely adored from very early on. And Elizabeth Bishop, who's a fabulous poet. I know a lot of Elizabeth Bishop fans in the neighborhood. Are there anybody else?
I don't know if you saw this column, not my favorite politically, but Ross Douthat, I'm going to mispronounce his name, had his column yesterday, had one of his brevia that he ends his column with was a link to a UK blog that discussed religious poems, and that there's a new resurgence of poems and poets who operate out of belief systems, and they tend to be more formalist, or at least I think Douthat was trying to make that point because he loves formalism. But I wonder if you've noticed that phenomenon, and I wonder if you consider yourself to be part of this phenomenon, which I might just be announcing now.
If I'm a part of the phenomenon, I had no idea that I was. I do what I do, and I think that's one of the things a poet doesn't need to do. Any artist is to just follow the path where the work is leading you. I do know poets who are definitely operate through a belief system, out of belief systems. Some of whom, not all of whom, are formalist. In fact, the person who introduced a wonderful, generous introduction to my book, The Mansions, which is 3 book-length poems together, Brian Wilson. I don't know if he's out there in Zoomlandia tonight, but Brian is a terrific young person, for me, young person, 40 years old, maybe 41. He has a strong formal bent to the work. Yeah, there's some, but I don't think it's exclusively that by any means. William Wenthe, who read here a week ago or so, with Stephen Schneider and Mary, I know Mary's here, Mary Bookinger, they gave wonderful readings, and they all have religious dimensions to their work, and they're not all strictly formal poets. By the way, just to let you know, Russ Douthat's father is a poet, Charles Douthat. He actually graduated from the same MFA program that I graduated from, the program for writers at Warren Wilson College. I know there's at least two other people in this room right now who have that pedigree. And Charles is a very fine poet. Charles is a very fine poet. Yeah. He was my student too, back in the day. Other folks.
I have one final question. If you could invite 3 poets to dinner, who would you choose and why?
Do they have to be living or dead?
Neither. It could be either.
They have to be.
Or from the future.
Okay. Well, I already said John Donne. We'd have to control him, though. We have to, ply him with wine and other kinds of. Late Dunner, the Jack Dunn or the John Donne. It's hard to. Who's going to show up? It's a mystery. Maybe some combination. And yeah, well, I already mentioned George Manley Hopkins, so I'll have to go with that now. I'll go with Elizabeth Bishop too, right? Because there are many others, that I would go to. I mean, I would have mentioned a recent person a great poet who died in the last year, Ellen Bryant Voigt, but I have gone to dinner with her, so that would be cheating.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to George Kalogeris for the very thoughtful introduction. Let's give George a round of applause. Thank you, George. Thank you to dear Daniel Tobin for the phenomenal reading. Let's give him a round of applause. And thanks to all of you. Thanks to everybody on Zoom. We have some books for sale. Dan and George will be signing books. Please fold your chairs up against one of the walls. I'd be very grateful. Thank you very much.
Perfect reading. Thanks. Really good question. They were. Yeah.